ever.
AmandaLand.
Oh, the week. Our distinguished guest. Here they come, yo. Here they come. Here they come, yo. Here they come. Our ambassador of the week this week is DJ Bwakali. Welcome to the show. Pan-African writer and leader. Hello, DJ.
Hello, Amanda. How are you doing?
I'm good. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, and it's great to be here today.
And it's great to wait, actually, hold on.
Oh, great.
Let me put on my Kenya bracelet real quick. All right. Let me put on my Kenya bracelet real quick.
That's the spirit.
Jambo.
Jambo sana, habari yako.
I went to Nairobi and I went to the Masai Mara.
Oh, you did?
I
how
did.
Was that experience?
Incredible. I really love Kenya. I mean, I've been to Ghana, I've been to Togo, and I've been to Kenya. So I haven't done like enough of that continent, but I really loved Kenya because I felt like there was a chillness.
Uh-huh.
There was a chillness. And then we also went to one of the slum is not the word. One of the, what's the proper term? Undocumented. Say it one more time.
Informal settlement.
Yes. So we went to one of the informal settlements, and I began working with one of the schools in the informal settlements. And so every year I sponsor high school students to be able to go to high school. So I sponsor 28 high school students in Kenya to attend high school every year. So I've been doing that for the past 3 years.
That's awesome. Our family, you know.
Yes.
And for me, that is going beyond the sentimental declaration of us being family. You're living it out in that sense.
Well, that is what brings us to our conversation today about Pan-Africanism, right? Because the concept of family on a global diasporic scale. So please talk to us. Let us in on where Pan-Africanism exists in 2025.
All right. You know, where to begin? Because there's a lot to unpack there. And first of all, thank you for having me. You know, it is really, really great to be able to have this conversation with yourself and with everybody, all the viewers. It is really something that I cherish when we are able to talk about Pan-Africanism. And for me, the starting point, people need to understand that barely 150 years ago, Africa as we know it today did not exist. And what do I mean by that? The political boundaries, the political borders that define Kenya, contemporary Togo, or Nigeria, or any African country for that matter, and there are 54 of them, they didn't exist at all. It's only when there was the partitioning in the infamous Berlin Conference in Europe in the late 19th century. That is when they partitioned and chopped up Africa, you know, like a piece of meat. And then now, voila, we have the borders that we have today. Why I say that is once we realize that, then we begin to see that Pan-Africanism is not just a historical or romanticized notion of African unity, but Pan-Africanism is what defined us for ages and ages until the late 19th century. So from where I sit, if Africa always existed as a unified entity with multiple kingdoms, multiple communities that coexisted and traded with each other, with unified languages, you know, whether they're the Bantu languages or the Nilotic languages, they're different language clusters. But the point is that Africa was existing for all that time, speaking those ancient languages, many that we still speak to date. then why in heaven's name should we just let go of that completely and insist on clinging on these borders that were imposed on us? Now that these borders are here, then it's okay, we can live with that. But what we must not live with is this notion that Kenya is completely different from Togo or from Uganda, because that's not historically true.
Why do you feel like there are African people who are against this unifying thought? Because I know that there is a push now to like make it so that you don't need visas on the continent to go to different countries. I know Ghana just opened its borders so that you don't need a visa if you are from another country on the African continent. What do you feel like is the counter argument to this?
The counter argument is the fact that today's generation of Africans, virtually 100%, this is the only Africa that they have known. And the vast majority of Africans, unfortunately, have not even had a chance to travel to other African countries, including neighboring countries, partly because of the economic situation, but also because the transport infrastructure is nothing to write home about when you're talking about cross-boundary highways and railway networks. So because, for example, imagine somebody who was born in Togo. Okay. Let's give them 50 years ago, because Africa is the most youthful continent. Our median age is less than 30. Globally, we're the most youthful continent. So somebody who is 50 years old in Togo is already crawling towards, seniority in terms of age. So this person would have been born sometimes in 1974.
Okay.
Yeah, 1974. Yet, despite being 50 years old, the vast majority of 50-year-olds have never ever left their African country. And the same applies to the younger generation, whether it is Gen Z or the younger millennials or Gen Alpha. They also, the vast majority, of course, have also never left their particular African country. So because of that, you'd find that a Ghanaian or a Tanzanian, the only identity they know as an African is Tanzanian or Ghanaian. So to them, the whole notion of they're first of all African and then Tanzanian is really something that it is not their lived experience. It may be something that people like myself may argue for, but their only lived experience is the fact that they're Ghanaian and their passport says Ghanaian. So when you
the nationalism is holding them.
Exactly. So they cling to that, which is why we have to be super pragmatic and practical and innovative, so that such people, we can begin to take practical steps that will help them to now appreciate the fact that we are 1.2 or 1.3 billion people in mainland Africa that share so many similarities. So the sooner we get accustomed to that, the more we, reach out our hands and our hearts, the better off we shall be. And I'll explain later on practically where we're better off economically and culturally and socially and spiritually if we are truly united as Pan-Africans.
Are Americans included in that in any way?
Yes, you see, African Americans, Black Americans, I'm not sure which is a politically correct term, but
either one is fine.
Yeah. The fact that there's African in that phrase means that they are African, and this includes not just Americans, but Africans in the diaspora, whether their forefathers came to a first generation Americans, or whether they came forcefully during the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, they're still African. And one of the things that we argue about when we talk about Pan-Africanism is the fact that this is not limited to Africans who are living on the African continent today, because that sort of exclusion is a very thing that we're fighting against, and we wouldn't wish our fellow Africans, people in whom the African blood runs in their veins, We wouldn't want to exclude that. And the sooner both Africans in mainland Africa, in the motherland, and African Americans begin to realize that we are one. We may have been separated by the Atlantic, but we are one. The sooner we realize that, the better off we shall all be. Because for Americans, when they come to Africa, many of them speak about just feeling a sense of belonging.
It's really wild. And my mother's from Grenada. So I know that feeling when I go to Grenada. And
Yes.
when I was landing in Ghana for the first time and we were like just approaching, looking out the window, I felt different. I felt like I had like an electromagnetic connection that was pulling me.
Yes.
Like, come on home, come on home. So it's not made up.
Yeah. And here's the thing, because for some of them, or all of them, or most of them, the fact that you have lived in America all your life, I understand that sometimes beyond that initial euphoric feeling, sense of belonging, because we are culturally different purely because we live in separate places, So sometimes there's a cultural clash, there's a cultural shock.
Yeah.
And when that happens, sometimes there may be people who may then look at that as evidence that, oops, this is not what I thought, or a sense of anticlimax. But my experience from talking to those who then stayed a little bit more, is this. They begin to realize that despite these cultural shocks, despite these cultural differences and linguistic differences, economic differences, that at the end of the day, when I call you sister or when you call me brother, it isn't just trying to be cute. There's actually that sense of, hey, my sister, my brother, So my thoughts on that would be that it's so important that we continue having these immersive experiences as a matter of policy from African governments, and of course now African Americans, that as a matter of policy, we begin being very intentional about immersive experiences, especially for African Americans in Africa.
Yeah.
And the more that happens, the more we realize that we truly are family, despite our evident differences. We still are family and are better off with that realization than sweeping it under the rug.
Now, you mentioned that you were going to talk about what ways like Pan-Africanism can be applied practically on the continent. I know you mentioned like railways that are interconnected, etc. Can you give me more about that?
Absolutely. Here's the thing. Unless we begin to show that we are better off economically and socially and even spiritually by exalting Pan-Africanism and not by quenching it and not by pushing it to the sidelines, we have a responsibility to meticulously show how indeed we are better off. And I'm going to attempt to do that briefly. Number one, when you're looking at it economically, myself, I think now I've been to about half of Africa, probably 25 countries or so. And I remember, Amanda, the first time I went to Dakar, Senegal, I had gone there. I used to be part of what was known as Indymedia. Indymedia was this global collective of independent media activists that really sought to answer the question, how can information make a lasting difference for the underprivileged people, for the marginalized people?
Right.
So through that, I got to visit Senegal. And I remember standing in the streets of Senegal and having hibiscus juice that is very common in Senegal. I think they call it bizap. And I remember feeling like these are my brothers, these are my sisters. But shock on me when I started walking in the streets of Dakar, and they speak Wolof, I speak Swahili, they speak French, I speak English. So, to my great shock and dismay, we could only use sign language,
Right.
to people who look like me. So I remember that was like quite a rude awakening. And that's the time I decided I'm going to learn French, and I did learn it because I realized that since half of Africa, they are so-called Francophone Africa, they speak French, and the other half speaks English, and a small fraction speaks Portuguese. If I want to be a Pan-African, I do not want to be limited to only one half of Africa.
Right.
So that realization alone made me realize that we must be able to work on these practical barriers that actually stand in the way of Pan-African. Now, economically, how I've then been able to benefit, I'm going to use myself as a case study for that, is when I started working at the United Nations Environment Program for a couple of years. I no longer work there, but I did work there for a couple of years. I was in charge of a regional African program for young people. I was a youth myself back then. And I remember how it was easier for me to communicate. And one of the things that, in fact, helped me to be good at that job was the fact that I could communicate a little bit more with other African youth, whereas there were other equally qualified people who may not have been able to communicate because they didn't understand any French. Now, at a trading level, if one is able to understand these different African languages, whether it is French for English-speaking Africans, or even Wolof, my own advocacy is for major African languages to be taught all over Africa, so that we are not limiting ourselves to either French or English.
Exactly.
But back to that, if I was able to do my job very well because of that Pan-African spirit and notion, and because of the practical steps that I took to be truly Pan-African, even linguistically, then it means that there are millions of Africans who are not trading with each other because they are not having a conversation with each other.
It's true. Well, it's communication at the base, right?
Yeah.
It really just opens the conversation, but you have to have the mindfulness to want to be able to have those conversations and to see those people as your people, which require conversation, right? Like if you don't feel like people are your people, then you may be like, well, I don't need to talk to them. But you going to Senegal and being like, well, these are my people, but I can't even talk to them.
Exactly.
Like that's what. No, I do understand that, and I see how so many of us in the States, like we have been sequestered to not look at our people as our people. There's been this idea that if you see African people from the continent as your people, that you are somehow denying yourself your identity as a Black American, when that's just simply not the case. Like, it's just identifying that we are a part of a whole, but we have our individuality. Now, we have some questions that people have submitted, so we're going to get to them of those questions. Karazan says, Mr. Bwakali, what does Marcus Garvey Jr.'s legacy of promoting Pan-Africanism mean to you? Now, I don't know if you know this, but they just posthumously pardoned Marcus Garvey here in the United States when Biden was leaving his presidency. So that's a thing.
Great question. And thank you very much for that question. Actually, it has a bittersweet ring for me, that question, because as somebody who is truly appreciative of Marcus Garvey myself, I wish that more Africans in the motherland would also be much more conversant with his work, and a few other people, in the African diaspora. And for me, the fact that he was a thought leader, the fact that he was able to speak in a very powerful way, able to speak, to who we are, to our identity, to really articulate a lot of issues that made people feel that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like you took that from my heart and then you put words to that. The fact that he was able to do that, I think, for me, his legacy and frankly, I've in the past embraced that challenge that people like me and other people who are thought leaders today must be able to continue with that. Of course, give it our own fingerprints, give it our own soul. But at the same time, not just look back nostalgically, but rather pick the baton. And now, like myself, since I'm a writer and a thought leader, to be able to mentor others, mentor other Africans, mentor other people in the African diaspora, so that we truly articulate our experience. And I'll give you an example to that as a direct answer, very briefly. There has been this TikTok trend of this indigenous Australian man that has been used as a prank during FaceTimes. And it has garnered millions and millions of views because America has the creator fund for the TikTok users in the US. People have even made a lot of money. So the other day I did a video explaining how we must not have modern forms of exploitation of Black people, of indigenous people, but then coat that or sugarcoat that so that it appears like just entertainment, yet there are layers of that are perpetuating some stereotypes of Black people, of indigenous people. So we've got to be able today, in the spirit of Marcus Garvey, of Malcolm X, of even Martin Luther King and other, even Bob Marley for me, we must be able to then articulate today's issues in an equally powerful manner, if not more powerful.
Which I don't think people understand how valuable that is. Like, that's what social media ends up really being for a lot of, folks. It's being able to articulate today's issues in a succinct manner, in an entertaining way, at least, where people can get it. And it's music has always, that's when you said Bob Marley, music has always had a real stronghold in that area. But I think it's really, social media has become its own natural space for that as well.
Yes.
Now, this is a really interesting question. Rolando asks, I don't know for sure because America does propaganda very well. What does acceptance for LGBTQ plus people look like on the continent? Now, I know in certain places like Ghana and Uganda in particular come to mind where they are very hostile to the LGBTQIA plus community. But in general, what would you say is the vibe on the continent?
Great question again. I'm a firm believer that we must be able to talk about everything. And anytime when we don't want to talk about some stuff, that in itself is a symptom of a deeper problem. So the direct answer to that is that it definitely is still a big problem. And I think one of the areas that, potential bone of contention is when people in America or Europe, including our fellow African Americans, rather African brothers and sisters, sometimes when they find this attitude of, a measure of non-acceptance or unwillingness to talk about this, sometimes they look at that as proof of either uncivilization or total intolerance, when in fact, I like to say that even America itself, has had this progression over the years. I think 15, 20 years ago or 25, just having public figures who were very open about their sexuality, was not as common as it is today. And as I recall, your immediate former president, Joe Biden, even went ahead of Barack Obama in, bringing this conversation out, especially the issue of gay marriage. So we also find it to be a little bit unfair when Americans then forget the fact that they also have had to take time, to come to terms with some of these things. So I think it's an area that my direct answer to this very good question is that there are pockets of acceptance, but at the moment it's just pockets of acceptance.
Where would you say, off top of your head, is a pocket of acceptance?
I think amongst the younger generation, but even then, like accepting their friends who are gay. But
like in terms of places, like is South Africa considered a more progressive place?
Yeah, South Africa, definitely. In fact, South Africa is way ahead of others. Then in a country like Kenya, whereas it is not out in the open, but amongst friends, for example, people do not shun their friends because they're gay. Yeah, they don't do that at all, especially in a place like Nairobi. Yeah.
Last question. Do you think President Traoré of Burkina Faso is going to effectively unite Africa?
Again, great question. And I'm a huge fan of Ibrahim Traoré, really huge fan. In fact, for 2 years, Amanda, I have done polls asking Africans whom they think is the best president on the continent. And for 2 years in a row, in 2024 and 2023, Ibrahim Traoré won. And the people who are supporting Ibrahim Traoré are not just young people, they're even older people. I think three things I want to articulate here. Number one, Africans have gotten fed up with business as usual when it comes to matters of presidency and leadership of countries. They've gone completely tired because the big man syndrome became so big on the continent that a lot of presidents just seem to lord it over the people. Yet that is also, in a weird way, topic for another day though, a product of Western-style democracy that was just copy and pasted into Africa about 60 years ago or 50 years ago for some countries. So that bred this big man syndrome. And then the Cold War, you had America supporting people like Mobutu Sese Seko. You had America and Belgium playing their role in the tragic assassination of Patrice Lumumba, and then supporting Mobutu and other dictators purely because it was a geopolitical game for them. So to an extent, the world helped in breeding this big man syndrome of the continent.
Absolutely.
Enter Ibrahim Traoré, a young guy, who is doing things very differently, who is standing up to the bully, to hegemony, and that has really resonated with Africans across the continent. However, on the matter of uniting Africa, I think he is triggering a spirit of Pan-Africanism and servant leadership and making Africans realize even more so that in their own respective countries, they deserve to have presidents who are servant leaders, who are transformative leaders.
Yeah.
So that alone is a step towards uniting Africa. But on his own, he still faces the crazy challenge of Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa and Lusophone Africa. He still faces the challenge of 80 to 90% of his fellow presidents who look at him and see more of a nuisance, see more of something they don't want to see in their own countries. So from that perspective, it is still a marathon that is in the first quarter and not a sprint that is towards the finish line.
Well, I feel like a lot of Americans are in a sprint towards trying to find where they can live in the world outside of this country. There's a lot of Americans that are looking to come to the continent. And I wanted to bring you on because I wanted to have an actual voice of somebody who lives on the continent, who is mindfully looking to bring together diaspora. And I hope that you guys were really listening, because Americans have a habit of going places without really understanding the landscape, without really taking into account the unique politicisms and the unique cultural setup of those places. And I think a lot of Americans really do look at Africa as a country. And even though, to your point, Pan-Africanism would be, including and inclusive of everybody, regardless of border, there are still unique tribes. There are still unique climates, locations, etc., that do need to be regarded and embraced. So I really want to thank you for coming. And you guys, so I get so much information and knowledge about the continent from DJ Bwakali on Instagram. So please follow DJ, and thank you so much for schooling us and, bringing Pan-Africanism to 2025 for us, because I feel like that's, for a lot of people, their only concept is like rooted in Marcus Garvey. And that is a century ago, but this is still here. It is still thriving, and folks like you are still pushing us forward towards it. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. And anybody who wants to learn more about Pan-Africanism, especially the founding presidents of Africa or historic leaders, either for better or worse, just Google my name, DJ Bwakali, and then add Savannah Footprints. Savannah Footprints, and then you'll be able to see the book that I've written on this matter. Having said that, thank you very much, Amanda, for what you're doing. I like how this is done in a fun manner. I say life is too short to be too serious all the time, even when we're handling serious matters. So I like the fact that we address deep issues, but with good vibes,
Yes, deep issues with good vibes. I like that, y'all. Deep issues with good vibes. Y'all go and get Savannah Footprints, Wisdom Whisperers from Historic African Leaders by DJ Bwakali. Thank you so much, and you have a fantastic rest of your day. I enjoyed laughing and learning with you. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell your friends. Also, listen to the podcast. It's available everywhere pods are casted. Listen ad-free by subscribing to Patreon Amanda Seals. Come on and join the Seals Squad. Views from AmandaLand, live 10 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Wednesday, with content on Thursday and Friday at YouTube Amanda Seals TV.